Chapter 1. The echoes begin. The library was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of paper and the soft tapping of keyboards. Daniel sat near the window, his laptop open, filled with complex graphs and lines of code. His fingers moved rapidly over the keys, eyes darting between the screen and a worn-out notebook filled with hastily scribbled formulas. He had been studying subconscious connections in dreams for months now, but something about his latest findings felt incomplete, like a puzzle with missing pieces. The idea that two minds could be linked through dreams was nothing new, but empirical evidence was scarce. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Maybe he was overthinking it. Across campus, Matt dribbled a basketball absent-mindedly on the outdoor court. His teammates had already left for the night, but he wasn't ready to go home yet. There was a weight in his chest, a lingering unease that had nothing to do with the upcoming tournament. The dream had returned. Since childhood, he had experienced vivid dreams, always of the same person, a stranger whose life felt oddly familiar. He had seen him studying, drinking coffee, even walking through the same hallways Matt used every day. It never made sense. Why would he dream about someone he had never met? Shaking his head, he tossed the ball into the hoop. It's just a dream, nothing more. The following afternoon, Matt was walking past the engineering building when he saw him. It was just a glimpse at first. A dark-haired guy sitting on the grass, eyes focused on an open book, absently chewing on the tip of his pen. Matt stopped in his tracks. His heart pounded loudly in his ears. It was him. Matt's breath hitched. No way. This is insane. He took a slow step forward, trying to get a better look. The man looked up, their eyes met, and for a second, something flickered in Daniel's expression. Curiosity, recognition, or perhaps just confusion. Matt felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Daniel arched a brow. "Do I know you?" Matt opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he possibly explain this without sounding crazy? He let out an awkward chuckle. "I just thought you looked familiar." Daniel studied him for a moment, as if assessing whether to believe him. Then, with a small shrug, he returned to his book. "Maybe we've had a class together?" Matt suggested. Daniel shook his head. "No, I don't think so." A pause. Matt exhaled, forcing himself to take control of the situation. He was overreacting. This guy was just some student. Maybe his brain had picked up his face from the crowd and incorporated him into a dream. That was all. Except it wasn't. Because every time Matt looked at him, memories that weren't his own surfaced. Studying late nights, hands scribbling notes, the feel of cold ceramic as he sipped coffee from a chipped white mug. Memories that belonged to Daniel. Daniel wasn't the type to entertain distractions, but something about Matt's lingering gaze unsettled him. He glanced back up, watching as the guy hesitated before sitting on the grass a few feet away. "You sure we haven't met before?" Matt asked casually, though his voice carried an edge of something deeper. Daniel tapped his pen against his book. "I don't think so. I'm usually buried in research, so unless you spend a lot of time in the electrical engineering lab, I doubt it." Matt exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Right, that makes sense." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "But you're not convinced." Matt hesitated. He had planned to walk away, let this go, chalk it up to an overactive imagination. But looking at Daniel now, he realized something. He needed to know the truth. "Okay, this is going to sound crazy," Matt admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "But I've been dreaming about you." Daniel blinked. "Excuse me? I mean, not in a weird way," Matt added quickly. "Just, I've been seeing you in my dreams for years, before I ever saw you in real life." Silence stretched between them. A bird chirped somewhere in the distance. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't scoff or look at Matt like he was insane. Instead, his gaze turned sharp, calculating. "Describe one." Matt hesitated, then shrugged. "I saw you drinking coffee in some cafe, writing in a notebook with a red pen. The cup had a crack near the handle." Daniel froze. That happened." His voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. 2 nights ago." Matt's stomach dropped. "What?" "I was at a cafe working on my thesis. I always use a red pen. Daniel's fingers tightened around the pen in his hand. And my coffee cup was chipped. They stared at each other, the weight of realization settling in. Holy shit, Matt muttered. Daniel's mind was racing. Subconscious connections were a theoretical concept, something he had been researching academically. But this was real, tangible proof. This isn't just some dream coincidence, Daniel said, voice steadier now. If you're seeing my life, that suggests a connection. Matt let out a shaky breath. So what does that mean? A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, the excitement of discovery overtaking his initial skepticism. It means we need to run a test. Matt chuckled dryly. A test? Daniel nodded. If this is real, we should be able to confirm it. Let's see if it works both ways. Matt frowned. Both ways. Daniel closed his notebook and leaned forward slightly. Tonight, focus on me before you fall asleep. Try to find me in your dreams. Matt swallowed. And then, Daniel's lips curled into a smirk. Let's see if you can visit my dream tonight. Chapter 2. The First Exchange. Matt sat across from Daniel in his dimly lit dorm room, the soft hum of a desk lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. Daniel had cleared his desk, laying out a structured experiment plan on a sheet of graph paper, filled with precise columns and meticulous notes. So, Daniel said, adjusting his glasses, if we're going to prove this isn't just some bizarre coincidence, we need a controlled environment. Both of us will sleep at the same time, follow the same pre-sleep routine, and document everything we experience immediately upon waking. Matt raised an eyebrow. You're making this sound like some kind of science fair project. It is, Daniel said without missing a beat. If we're actually sharing a connection, it means there's a phenomenon happening here beyond normal dreaming. And that makes it worth studying. Matt ran a hand through his hair. Okay, document. What do I need to do? Daniel handed him a notepad. Write down your thoughts before sleeping. Anything that's on your mind, even the smallest detail. When you wake up, write down everything you remember. No filtering, no second guessing. Matt flipped through the pages. And if I wake up and only remember some dumb dream about, I don't know, eating cereal on the moon? Then we compare notes and see if there's any overlap, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair. You ready? Matt exhaled sharply. Not really, but let's do it anyway. That night, Matt lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He tried not to think too hard about the experiment, but his mind kept drifting back to Daniel, the way he talked, the way he focused so intensely on things, the way he had been the exact same person Matt had seen in his dreams for years. He finally closed his eyes, letting exhaustion take over. And then, suddenly, he was standing in a lab. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The air smelled sterile, like books and faint traces of coffee. He looked down. His hands, slender and steady, held a circuit board. His fingers worked on the tiny wiring, making adjustments with a precision he didn't recognize as his own. He turned his head and caught his reflection in the glass of a nearby cabinet. Daniel's face stared back at him. Matt inhaled sharply. He reached up, touching his cheek, no, Daniel's cheek. The sensation was real, vivid, like he was completely inhabiting this body. His heartbeat quickened. He moved, testing the limits of this experience. When he raised a hand, Daniel's hand moved. When he took a step, the floor beneath him felt solid. Holy shit, he whispered. But the voice that came out was Daniel's. He turned back to the work table. He knew, without knowing how, exactly what he had been working on before he had woken up in this body. Equations filled the whiteboard in front of him, and he understood them perfectly. A thrill ran through him. He wasn't just seeing through Daniel's eyes, he was thinking through his mind. The realization struck him like a jolt. This wasn't just a dream. Meanwhile, Daniel woke up with a start. His breath came quick and shallow. His body felt foreign. He was covered in sweat, muscles aching like he had just gone through an intense workout. But that wasn't what alarmed him. It was the memory, clear as day, of being on a basketball court, dribbling a ball, his heart pounding as he maneuvered past defenders. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished wood, the sensation of jumping, of feeling the ball leave his fingertips in a perfect shot. He had never played basketball in his life. Daniel sat up, running a hand through his hair. He could still feel the adrenaline rush, the exact weight of the ball, the pressure of the game. It wasn't just a memory, it was an experience. Matt's experience. Heart pounding. He reached for his notebook, scribbling down every single detail he could recall. His fingers trembled with excitement. This was real. The next morning, Matt practically burst into Daniel's dorm room without knocking. Daniel barely had time to look up before Matt threw his notebook onto the desk. "Tell me what you wrote down." Daniel flipped open his own notes. "You first." Matt huffed but started reading. "I was in a lab, a research space. I was working on some sort of circuit board, except it wasn't me. It was you. I saw your reflection and I moved like you. I even understood equations that I have no business understanding." Daniel nodded, flipping through his own notes. "I was on a basketball court. I wasn't watching a game, I was playing in one. I could feel every movement, every reaction. My body was stronger, faster. I even remember the pressure of taking a shot. And I scored." He looked up, eyes gleaming. "Matt, I have never played basketball in my life, but I remember that game." Matt leaned back, running both hands through his hair. "So it's not just dreams. We're actually exchanging perspectives." Daniel tapped his pen against the table, deep in thought. "It's more than that. We're experiencing each other's realities. Your skills, your knowledge, it became mine for that moment." Matt exhaled slowly. "This isn't just some weird dream connection, is it?" Daniel smirked. "No, this is something entirely new." Matt laughed, the sound tinged with disbelief. "So what now, Doc?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes shining with excitement. "Now, we push the limits. Let's see how far this connection really goes." Chapter 3. A Window Between Two Worlds. Matt tossed his backpack onto Daniel's desk and flopped into the chair opposite him. "All right, Doc. Let's get this straight. We're not just having weirdly synchronized dreams. We're literally swapping perspectives." Daniel looked up from his notebook, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Based on our notes, it appears so." He tapped the open pages filled with diagrams and hurriedly scribbled observations. "It's not just that we're seeing each other's lives. We're experiencing them as if we were the other person." Matt ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I felt what you felt last night. That weird sense of accomplishment when you finished your code? That was me. And you?" He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "You played an entire basketball game in your sleep, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. "I woke up exhausted." Matt barked a laugh. "Yeah. Welcome to my life." He shook his head, the humor fading. "But that's just it. I wasn't controlling anything. You were just living through me, right?" Daniel hesitated before nodding again. "That's what I suspect." Which raises an interesting question. If you were consciously aware while inside my perspective, what happens if you try to influence it? Matt blinked. "You mean, like, make you do something?" "Yes, a small action. Something harmless but intentional." Matt considered it, then smirked. "Fine. Next time I'll write something in your notebook. Let's see if it appears when you wake up." That night, Matt found himself slipping into Daniel's world again. This time, instead of simply observing, he tested his control. He looked down at the notebook on Daniel's desk, feeling an odd sense of disconnect. His hands weren't his own, but he moved them anyway. He grabbed a pen and scribbled a quick message. "Hey Doc, still think this is all just a theory?" The moment he finished writing, the dream collapsed. Daniel jolted awake, heart pounding. For a moment, he wasn't sure what had caused his sudden wakefulness. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye. His notebook lay open on the desk, the words scrawled in familiar yet foreign handwriting. His breath caught. It was real. The next morning, Matt didn't even wait for Daniel to say anything. The moment he saw the stunned look on his friend's face, he grinned. "It worked, didn't it?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the notebook across the table. Matt's own message stared back at him. Hey Doc, still think this is all just a theory? Matt whistled lowly. Damn. So what's next? Daniel exhaled. This isn't just dreams, Matt. We're connected. This is something else. Matt leaned back, thoughtful. You know, this whole thing reminds me of a dumb legend I heard when I first got here. Daniel frowned. A legend? Yeah. The window of destiny. Matt tapped a finger on the table. Supposedly, if you stand in front of this old window at the right time, you see something unexpected. Some say it shows your future. Some say it shows the person you're meant to meet. Daniel considered the information. And you think that has something to do with us? Matt shrugged. I don't know, but it's a weird coincidence. Don't you think? Daniel looked down at the notebook again. The scrawled message felt like proof of something bigger than either of them could comprehend. I think, he said slowly, we need to find that window. Chapter 4, The Link to the Past. Daniel sat in the dimly lit archives room, his fingers methodically flipping through old university records. The scent of aging paper filled the air as he scanned documents for anything related to the so-called window of destiny. He had spent the last 2 hours buried in faded blueprints, campus renovation logs, and newspaper clippings. Yet so far, he had found nothing conclusive. His laptop screen glowed softly, the cursor blinking in his research notes. Comprehensive building, formerly an abandoned structure, repurposed. Daniel muttered under his breath, adjusting his glasses as he leaned closer. A faded map from 15 years ago caught his attention. Unlike the current building layout, this blueprint showed an older structure labeled Research Facility, Restricted Access. His heart skipped a beat. Just then, the door creaked open, and Matt strolled in, balancing a coffee cup in one hand. Still alive, Doc? He teased, setting the cup beside Daniel. Or have the archives claimed you? Daniel exhaled sharply. I think I found something. He pointed at the blueprint. Look at this. The comprehensive building wasn't always here. It was built over some kind of research facility. Matt furrowed his brows, taking a sip of his coffee. Huh, never knew that. So what kind of research? Daniel tapped the label. Restricted access. Whatever it wasn't open to just anyone. Matt leaned over, eyes scanning the document. Weird. You think it has something to do with our situation? Daniel hesitated. I don't know yet, but if there were studies on subconscious connections or dream phenomena, then we might not be the first. Matt finished for him, setting his cup down. He drummed his fingers against the table, lost in thought. You know, this place. I think I've been here before. Daniel blinked. What? When? Matt frowned, staring at the blueprint as if it held the answer. Years ago, when I was a kid, maybe 7 or 8, my uncle worked maintenance at the university, and sometimes he'd bring me along when he had late shifts. I'd wander around places I shouldn't have. One night, I ended up in an old building. Had to be this one before it was renovated. Daniel's pulse quickened. And? What do you remember? Matt hesitated, his usual carefree demeanor replaced with something more serious. There was this window, he said finally. A big, cracked one on the top floor. I stood in front of it, and, I swear, I saw something I shouldn't have. A reflection that wasn't mine. Daniel sat up straighter. What do you mean? Matt exhaled slowly. I don't know. I was a kid, right? But I remember looking at my reflection, and for a split second, it wasn't me. It was someone else. Or maybe... He stopped himself, shaking his head. I don't know, document. Maybe I just imagined it. But after that, I started having those dreams. The ones about you. Daniel felt a chill creep up his spine. You think the window triggered it? Our connection. Matt gave a small, humorless laugh. Hell if I know. But what are the odds? He gestured to the blueprint. This place, this research facility, was here before the renovations. And something about it stuck with me for 15 years. Daniel nodded slowly, his mind racing. Then we need to dig deeper. If this place really was researching something related to our condition, we might find answers. He shut the folder, determination flashing in his eyes. We need to find out what they were studying, and why it was abandoned. Matt grinned despite himself. Guess we're breaking into more archives, huh? Daniel smirked. Wouldn't be the first time. As the two exchanged glances, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The past was calling, and they were ready to answer. Chapter 5. Changing Reality. The discovery about the window of destiny had left Daniel and Matt with more questions than answers. Their connection wasn't just about dreams. It stretched into reality in ways neither had fully understood. And Daniel, ever the scientist, wasn't content with just theories. We need to test this. Matt raised an eyebrow as he lounged on Daniel's dorm room chair, spinning a basketball between his fingers. Test what? That we're both going crazy. Daniel, sitting cross-legged on his bed, didn't look up from his notebook. That our connection goes beyond dreams. What if we can influence each other's actions in reality? Matt stopped spinning the ball. That sounds like some horror movie possession shit. Daniel sighed, pushing his glasses up. It's not possession. Think about it. When you're in my dream, you can see, hear, and feel everything I do. What if that works the other way around? What if you can influence my body while I'm asleep? Matt whistled low. So you want me to Jedi mind trick you in your sleep? Essentially, yes. Matt considered for a moment before leaning forward. Okay, fine. What do I do? Daniel glanced at his watch. We go to sleep at the same time. While I'm sleeping, you'll focus on making me move. Something simple, like raising my arm. Matt smirked. If I make you punch yourself, do I win? Daniel shot him a look. Just don't mess around. That night, Matt lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't sure how to even start. Influence Daniel's body? How? Closing his eyes, he tried to focus. He imagined Daniel in his dorm, fast asleep. In his mind, he reached out not physically but through their connection. Move your right arm, document. Just a little. Silence. Nothing. Matt exhaled in frustration. Come on, Daniel. Suddenly, an image flickered in his mind. Daniel, lying in bed, his fingers twitching. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, his right arm lifted off the bed. Matt's eyes snapped open. No way. The next morning, Daniel woke up groggy, rubbing his eyes. He glanced at his arm, still slightly raised. Something felt off. Matt was already at his door, knocking loudly. Rise and shine, document. We need to talk. Daniel opened the door, squinting at him. Did it work? Matt grinned. You tell me. Daniel frowned, then glanced at his notebook where he had scribbled instructions the night before. His own handwriting stared back at him. Lift right arm. A chill ran down his spine. I didn't move it on my own. Matt's grin widened. Bingo! At first, the experiment seemed like an exciting breakthrough. But then, the unintended consequences began. Matt started feeling things, Daniel's emotions. It was subtle at first. A wave of irritation when Daniel was frustrated with his research. A strange warmth in his chest when Daniel was excited about a discovery. And then, one afternoon in the gym, it hit Matt like a truck. He was mid-practice, focused on free throws, when a sudden surge of anxiety crashed over him out of nowhere. His hands trembled. His heart pounded. He felt like he was drowning. Gasping, he stumbled off the court. His teammates called after him, but he barely heard them. He grabbed his phone and, with shaking fingers, dialed Daniel. Hey! What the hell are you doing? Matt demanded, voice tight. Daniel sounded confused. Reading my thesis notes? Are you freaking out about something? A pause. Then, yeah, a little. I just realized I might have miscalculated some data, and if I have to redo the experiment, it's gonna set me back weeks. Wait, how did you know? Matt closed his eyes. Because I just felt all of that. Like, physically felt it. The line went silent. Then, Daniel's voice came through, quiet but sharp. Matt, I think our connection is getting stronger. The lines between their minds were blurring, and neither of them knew how to stop it. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. Matt paced back and forth in his dorm room, his breath shallow, hands gripping his head. The air felt suffocating, charged with an energy he couldn't define. His own thoughts, no, not his own, kept bleeding into his mind, waves of emotions that had nothing to do with him crashing against his psyche. A deep frustration over an unfinished research paper. A sudden surge of nostalgia at the sight of an old notebook. A sharp pang of longing, directed at him? Shit, Matt muttered, shaking his head violently, as if the movement could expel the foreign sensations invading his mind. He hadn't seen Daniel in 2 days. He had avoided him on purpose, afraid of what might happen if they were in the same space for too long. But even with distance, he couldn't escape. The connection was stronger than ever. A knock on the door jolted him. Matt tensed, heart hammering. He knew who it was before he even opened it. Matt, open up. Daniel's voice was firm but tinged with concern. Matt squeezed his eyes shut, debating whether to pretend he wasn't there. But the bond between them betrayed him. Daniel probably already knew how bad it had gotten. I swear to God, if you don't open this door, I'll... Matt yanked it open before Daniel could finish the sentence. You'll what? Break it down. Daniel's eyes flickered with surprise before settling into a deep frown. He took in Matt's appearance. Bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair, tension radiating from every fiber of his body. You look like hell. Feel like it too, Matt admitted, stepping aside so Daniel could enter. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. It's getting worse. I can't tell what's mine and what's yours anymore. I close my eyes, and suddenly I'm in your head. Awake, walking, thinking. Daniel crossed his arms, expression unreadable. You haven't been sleeping, have you? Matt let out a bitter laugh. Would you, if you kept waking up in someone else's life? Daniel's gaze softened. We need to figure this out. Together. Or what? Matt snapped. What if this doesn't stop? What if I lose myself completely? I already feel like I'm slipping. Daniel hesitated, then quietly said, I don't want to lose you either. Matt faltered. The exhaustion, the fear, the overwhelming weight of the last few days. They all came crashing down. He turned away, pressing his palms against his desk. Then what the hell do we do? Daniel stepped closer, a grounding presence despite the chaos between them. You need to rest. You're burning out, and that's making it worse. I can't. You have to. You said it yourself, you're slipping. If you break, what happens to both of us? Matt clenched his jaw, unwilling to admit that Daniel was right. But before he could argue further, Daniel placed a firm hand on his shoulder, guiding him towards the bed. Just sleep, Matt. I'll stay. Matt hesitated, but his body betrayed him. He was too damn tired to fight anymore. With a heavy sigh, he collapsed onto the bed. If I start talking in my sleep, it's your fault. Daniel chuckled lightly. The sound warmed despite the tension lingering between them. Noted. Matt closed his eyes, expecting the usual descent into confusion. But this time it was different. The world around him blurred, not into Daniel's perspective, but something else entirely. A new space, unfamiliar yet deeply intimate. He wasn't controlling this. Neither was Daniel. The connection had taken on a life of its own. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel's voice echoed. Matt, do you see this? Matt turned, eyes widening at the vision before him. A place neither of them had ever stepped into, yet somehow they both recognized. Someone was waiting for them there. Chapter 7. The Hidden Truth. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine as he opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling of his dorm room. His breathing was uneven, and his heartbeat pounded against his ribs. The vision had been so vivid, too vivid. It wasn't just another shared dream. It had felt real, as if they had been transported back in time. Beside him, Matt groaned, rubbing his temples. He looked disoriented, his usual sharp gaze unfocused. Tell me you saw that too, he muttered. Daniel swallowed hard. Yeah, he said. We were in the past. In the old building. Matt exhaled, running a hand through his messy hair. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't like before. This wasn't just me seeing your life or you seeing mine. We were somewhere else entirely. Daniel sat up and turned to his desk, pulling out a notebook and quickly scribbling down the details. We need to find out if what we saw was real. The only way to do that is to check the archives again. Matt let out a dry laugh. Great, more digging through ancient records. This is turning into some paranormal detective novel. Daniel shot him a look. You'd rather just ignore it? No, Matt admitted. It's just, every time we dig deeper, this gets weirder. And I'm not sure how much more my brain can take. Daniel gave him a reassuring nod. We'll figure it out. The university archives were tucked away in the basement of the library, filled with dust-coated files and fading documents. Daniel had spent hours here before, but today something felt different. As they rifled through old blueprints and historical records, Daniel paused, his fingers hovering over a thick, weathered file labeled Restricted. Cognitive Studies Research. Matt, he called, pulling the file off the shelf and laying it on the table. The cover was dated decades ago, long before either of them had been born. Matt leaned in. What the hell is this? Daniel flipped open the first page. The documents inside detailed an old research project conducted in the very building that once stood where the comprehensive building was now located. Subconscious synchronization, Daniel murmured as he read. They were studying people who had unexplained cognitive links, connections between minds. Matt's eyes narrowed. You're saying, people like us? Daniel nodded slowly. Some of these cases suggest that certain individuals shared thoughts, emotions, even memories without ever having met. Matt exhaled sharply. That's insane. They continued reading, flipping through notes and case studies. One report stood out, its pages yellowed and edges curling with age. Some subjects displayed signs of cognitive linking before birth. Matt stiffened. Wait, what? Daniel scanned the lines again, his pulse quickening. There were cases where two people were linked from the very beginning, before they were even born, as if their minds had always been connected. Matt leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. You're telling me this whole time we weren't just some random coincidence? Daniel hesitated. I don't know, but if this study was real, and if what we've been experiencing is anything like what they described. Matt let out a breathless laugh. This is beyond messed up. Daniel met his gaze. It explains a lot, though. Why we started having these dreams. Why the connection keeps getting stronger. Silence stretched between them as they absorbed the revelation. The weight of it settled over them like an unseen force, shifting something fundamental between them. Matt finally broke the quiet. What if we were connected before we even knew each other? Daniel didn't have an answer, but deep down, a part of him had already started to believe it. Chapter 8. Severing the link? The silence between them stretched longer than it ever had before. For the first time in weeks, Daniel and Matt found themselves at an impasse, standing in Daniel's dorm room, yet feeling worlds apart. We need to talk about this, Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. His voice was calm, calculated, but there was a hesitation behind it. Matt, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed, exhaled sharply. What's there to talk about? You want to break it, don't you? Daniel's jaw clenched. I don't know if break is the right word, but we need to figure out what this means for us long-term. Matt scoffed. Long-term? You make it sound like this is a business deal. He shook his head and turned away, staring at the bookshelf but not really seeing it. This connection, this thing we have, how can you just think about cutting it off? It's not that simple, Daniel said, voice rising slightly. He took a step closer. Matt, we don't even know if we're making choices of our own anymore. What if this connection is influencing us in ways we don't understand? Matt's fingers tightened into fists. What if it is? What if that's not a bad thing? He turned back to face Daniel, his eyes burning with frustration. For weeks, we've been sharing thoughts, dreams, memories. And yeah, it's been overwhelming. But you're seriously telling me that you'd rather throw it away than try to understand it? Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure how to put into words the growing fear gnawing at him. This bond had become an anchor in his life, but at what cost? He had started to wonder if he and Matt were losing themselves in each other. "I just think we should have a choice," Daniel finally said. "Right now, we don't." Matt's expression hardened. "So what? You want to find a way to stop this?" Daniel exhaled. "I want to know if we can. And if we can, I want to decide if we should." Matt let out a bitter laugh. "You know what, Doc? I thought we were in this together. But maybe I was wrong." A tense silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Daniel felt a sharp pang in his chest at the words, but he said nothing. Matt didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. For the first time since they had discovered their bond, Daniel felt truly alone. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He usually dreaded sleep for the chaos it brought, the flood of Matt's emotions, the strange echoes of memories that weren't his. But now, as exhaustion pulled at him, a different kind of fear settled in his gut. What if this was the last night they would ever share a dream? Across campus, Matt was feeling the same weight pressing down on him. Lying on his bed, he squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the familiar pull of their connection. Nothing came. The dreamscape remained dark, silent, and for the first time, the absence of Daniel in his mind was more painful than any confusion their bond had ever caused. Chapter 9, Acceptance. The silence between them had stretched for days. Daniel buried himself in research, papers piling up on his desk, while Matt spent hours in the gym, pushing himself through drills that left his muscles aching. But no matter how hard they tried to distract themselves, the emptiness followed them. The absence of dreams, the absence of each other, was a void neither of them could ignore any longer. Finally, on a crisp evening, Matt stood outside Daniel's dorm, hesitation gripping him. He raised his hand to knock, then let it drop. Before he could change his mind and walk away, the door swung open. Daniel stared at him, weary but expectant. "I knew you'd come." Matt let out a rough exhale, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, guess we can't avoid this forever." Daniel stepped aside, gesturing him in. Matt walked in, immediately noticing the mess. Papers scattered across the bed, books open on the floor. It wasn't like Daniel to be this disorganized. "You've been busy," Matt muttered. Daniel huffed a dry laugh. "Not really, just pretending to be." He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "You?" Matt sat on the edge of the bed, fingers interlaced between his knees. "Same." He glanced up, finally meeting Daniel's gaze. "This whole thing, it's messing with me." Daniel nodded. "Me too." A long pause stretched between them before Daniel finally spoke again, voice quieter, steadier. "What do you want, Matt?" Matt swallowed. "I don't know. I keep telling myself that maybe it's better this way, that maybe we were never meant to be this connected. But then I think about it, about you, about what we've shared, and I don't think I can go back to how things were before." Daniel's lips parted slightly, his breath hitching. "You don't see this as a curse?" Matt shook his head. "I did, for a while. But now, I think I was just scared." Daniel studied him, eyes searching. "Scared of what?" Matt let out a short laugh, rubbing his palms together. "Losing myself, losing control, but mostly, losing you." The words hung in the air, weighty and unguarded. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders loosening. "I was scared too," he admitted. "Not just about the connection, about what it means, about us." Matt nodded, his heartbeat steadying at Daniel's honesty. "So, what do we do now?" Daniel pushed off the desk, moving to sit beside him. Their shoulders brushed. "We stop fighting it," he said simply. "We embrace it." Matt turned his head, eyebrows raised. "And how do we do that?" A slow smile tugged at Daniel's lips. "By letting go. Instead of trying to control it or break it, we see where it takes us." Matt considered this for a moment before nodding. "One last experiment?" Daniel chuckled. "No control, no resistance, just us." Matt smirked. All right, document. Let's do this. That night, for the first time in days, they fell asleep without fear, without tension. As the dream world enveloped them, something shifted. No longer did Matt wake up in Daniel's life, nor did Daniel find himself trapped in Matt's world. Instead, they stood side by side, the dream forming around them. A vast open space, filled with the echoes of their past memories, their shared experiences. For the first time, they weren't alone in the dream. They were together. Epilogue, the window's answer. The comprehensive building had changed over the years, but standing in front of it now, Daniel felt as though time had barely moved. The once worn-down structure was now sleek and modern, its glass windows reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Students passed by, some laughing, some deep in conversation, their voices merging into the familiar hum of campus life. Beside him, Matt let out a low whistle. They really fixed this place up. Daniel chuckled, adjusting the strap of his messenger bag. It was overdue for an update, though I have to admit, I kinda miss the old building. Matt smirked. You miss that dusty old place? The one with the flickering lights and doors that barely shut. It had character. Matt shook his head with a grin, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. You sound old, says the basketball coach who complains about back pain after practice. Hey, Matt shot him a look. I've been running drills with these kids. You should see how fast they are. Makes me feel ancient. Daniel let out a soft laugh, but as they approached the far end of the building, their conversation naturally slowed. They both knew where they were headed, the place where it all began. They reached a quiet corridor, far from the bustling main halls. The room that once held the so-called window of destiny no longer existed in its original form. The renovations had reshaped the space, leaving no trace of its former self, at least not to most people. But Daniel and Matt knew better. Matt exhaled, running a hand through his hair as he glanced at the large glass window now standing in its place. So, do you think that window really showed the future? Daniel crossed his arms, considering the question. Or maybe, he mused, it just showed what we already knew deep down. Matt snorted. You're still doing that thing where you sound all mysterious and philosophical. It's part of the professor persona. I have to keep up appearances. Matt rolled his eyes but said nothing, letting the silence settle between them. They had spent so many years unraveling the mystery of their connection, questioning whether it was fate, science, or something in between. And yet, standing here now, there was nothing left to question. Simply was. A group of students passed by, their chatter filling the space where words failed. One of them, a boy with a notebook tucked under his arm, glanced briefly at the window before walking on, unaware of the stories it held. Daniel watched them go, smiling faintly. And so the legend continues. Matt hummed in agreement. Think they'll ever figure it out? Daniel shook his head. Probably not. But maybe that's for the best. Let them make their own discoveries. Matt turned back toward the window, his expression thoughtful. As the sun dipped lower, the reflection on the glass shifted. For the briefest moment, just as the light caught it at the right angle, a faint figure appeared. An echo of the past, a reminder of the boy who once stood here, staring into something he couldn't quite explain. Matt blinked and the image was gone. Just a trick of the light. Maybe. He smiled to himself and stepped away. Come on, document. Let's get out of here. Daniel followed, glancing back one last time before they walked away, leaving behind a piece of their story, woven into the very fabric of the campus, waiting for the next set of dreamers to stumble upon it. The legend of the window of destiny lived on.